Well, hey, Ruckus Makers. Today you get 2-for-1 special, which is really great. Erika Bear, who's been actually on the podcast before, is here again. And she's been an educator for over 20 years, currently serving as the assistant superintendent in the Ashland School District, a special educator at heart. She is passionate about supporting all students through individual supports to reach their limitless potential. And then Tiffany Burns is here as well, who loves working with kids. In her 2 decades in education, she taught elementary, middle, and high school students and worked as an instructional coach, curriculum writer, and university instructor in Oregon, Alaska, and Mexico. She loves her current role as an elementary school principal, where she gets to lead and play with her favorite people, kids, and their grown-ups. Erika and Tiffany are here today to talk about their new book, Connecting Through Conversation, a playbook for talking with students. Erika and Tiffany, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having us. We're thrilled to be here.
Thanks, Danny.
Yeah, pleasure. Great to have you here. So, Tiffany, kids were quite impulsive pre-pandemic, and now they might even be more impulsive. So tell me your kid in the tree story.
Well, I've had a few of those actually, but there was one a few months ago that really stood out to me. So I was in the cafeteria with our kindergarten, first and second grade students, and this group of students came up to me and let me know that another kiddo was having a pretty hard time. So I went over to check out what was going on, and he was having a hard time. And he was yelling, he was doing some name calling, and he was really talking about how upset he was that one of his friends had told his topdist secret. And so I was trying to, big deal. Topdist was clearly a big secret. And so I'm trying to, de-escalate, get him calm, kind of remove the audience because it was causing a bit of a scene. And before I could do that, he bolted. Like, he took off. He ran out of the cafeteria. He ran kind of behind this area of our building. So I took off after him. And when I got there, I found him about 8 feet up in the tree. And so I had a choice at that point. Like, I did not have an opportunity to just let him chill out and cool down. He's 8 feet up in a tree and climbing. And so I took just a minute and took a beat, took a deep breath and gathered myself, made sure my feet were firmly on the ground and I was centered. And I didn't start by telling him to get out of the tree. I started by, I use the strategy that Erika and I talk about in the book, acknowledge, validate, coach. And so I started by acknowledging and saying, like, whoa, bud, you are super angry. You are so angry. You're mad that he told your topdist secret and you're really upset. And he paused and stopped climbing. And so I was like, okay, I'm getting some traction here. We're in the right direction, And then I moved into validating. And so then I'm telling him, I get it. I totally get it. That hurt your feelings. He told your secret. You feel pretty upset about that. I get why you'd want to run up here and hide. And he pauses and he looks at me. And so I was like, okay, we're getting there. We're getting there. And I was like, I get why you'd want to hide. And this is the point where I start moving into coach. And so what I said is, it's really not super safe to be up here this high, hiding in this tree. But what we can do is there's a place in my office that you could come hide. There's a super cozy bean bag and you can hang out in there for a bit and you can hide in there. And he's kind of looking at me and I'm going, all right, I've got him. And so at that point, then I said, so I can either help you down out of the tree or you can get down on your own. What do you think would work best? And he just started kind of working his way down the tree. And then I was able to walk with him back to my office where we had a more connected conversation. And there was a couple things that happened there. Like, I stayed really calm. I did acknowledge, validate, coach in that order. I think a lot of times as educators, we jump straight into coach, like down, out of the tree now. But when we stop and we don't do that acknowledge and validate, students don't feel like we hear, like we're understanding them. Like, I didn't, when I did that, I was letting him know, I get that you're angry and I get why you're angry. And as soon as he felt heard and understood, then he was more available for that coaching piece. The other thing I did is I offered choices, but it wasn't like, and I didn't ask a question. I didn't say, do you feel like coming down from the tree now? Like, no, that's not a question. It's a, I need you down from the tree, but I offered a choice. Do you want to get down on your own or would you like me to help you? So I gave him some
Hmm.
agency and autonomy there. And it ended up being a really successful conversation once we were not, you know, so high up off the ground.
Yeah, 8 feet up a tree, that's quite impressive, right?
Yeah,
I
he's
think the
skilled.
immature
He's
me,
deeply athletic.
I would have super asked like, okay, what's the view like up there, type of thing. But I really appreciate your heart centered approach, acknowledging, validating, and like you said, you're communicating to that kid. I get where you're at, right, and why you're upset, and that's literally the words you use too. And then gave some forced choice, right? So you're coming out of the tree. Would you like to do it on your own or with help? And yeah, what a successful way to do that. So thanks for the kid in the tree story. um, let's move on to talking about when you gave a micro PD to some education assistants. What's that story and what did you learn?
Yeah. So, well, those kind of things happen frequently, right? So you're in this
Yeah.
situation. Those are not super comfortable situations, and you have to think on your feet really, really quickly. And so, when I do professional development, I'm an administrator, I'm a principal, but I'm a teacher at heart. So to me,
Hmm.
it's really important when I do professional development that that it's really engaging, that I'm using best practices, that I'm allowing opportunity for people to make meaning. So they're doing think, pair, shares and group talk and different activities. And we were having a meeting with our educational assistants and our student advocate, who's just a fabulous human. She said, do you think that when you're sharing with the educational assistants today, you could share some of your tips and tricks? And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And she said, just the little things that the little nuggets that you share with me when I'm going to talk to a kid. And I was like, oh, yeah, I could do that. And so I started jotting down some ideas of like, don't ask a question if it's not a choice. When kids are getting louder and faster, we're going to go lower and slower. We're not going to force eye contact, a bunch of little things like that. And so I wrote them all down and we're we're having this meeting on Zoom. It was still during a time when we couldn't gather together,
Right.
and I'm sharing these little ideas that I have, and I'm looking at the educational assistants and they're writing everything that I'm saying down in this very what I thought was a not engaging PD opportunity. And when I realized how much they were writing it down and how serious they were taking it, I realized how important and helpful those ideas can be when really connecting with students and when you're in those kind of intense, moving quickly situations.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And Erica, let's bring you into the conversation. And Tiffany was just talking about sort of these things that we almost devalue or discount because it's
Yeah.
natural to us at this point. But you see people writing it all down because for them it's paradigm shifting or a completely new worldview. So, why do you think, Erica, that this information isn't such common knowledge?
Yeah, so when we first started kind of working with groups and sharing this information out, we were a little kind of nervous that we were going to offend some folks who'd chosen to
Hmm.
go into education by an idea that they didn't already know how to talk with kids. I think most of us got into it because we love kids, we love talking to kids. Um, and that's not what we're saying at all, that folks don't know how to do it. It's really just that through our experience, through trial and error, through all of our kind of work digging into equity based and trauma based practices, we realize there's just a gap of resources. It's not something that's explicitly taught in our teacher or administrative prep programs. We found ourselves doing a whole lot of coaching with the folks that we worked with, like, here, try
Hmm.
this, use this sentence stem, think about this framing for that conversation. Um, and it's not intuitive. And so when we're really coaching folks around building connection, we were feeding them a lot of tools that had started to feel intuitive to us but really had come with a lot of time and practice. And it's only when it's done in a really thoughtful and systematic way that you can truly create a culture of connection in a classroom or school. And the tools just aren't intuitive, and so but writing them down felt important to us.
Yeah, and that's what I guess part of the book closes those gaps for
Yeah.
readers. Is that okay to say?
Yeah, I think so. Tiffany and I had been talking about doing a project together for years, right? We've worked together for a long time, and we were in a meeting just last fall and debriefing some powerful conversations that Tiffany had had with students, and she was actually talking about that PD that she had done with her educational assistants. And
Yeah.
as I'm leaving, she's like, "That's the book, How to Talk with Kids, that we need." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, that does sound like a great book." And I'm thinking she's like to buy for staff, to read myself, to kind of build up our skills. And so I went and I'm searching everywhere. And I'm on Amazon, I'm on Google, I'm
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
the, Barnes and Noble, and there's nothing. And so I went back to her, I'm like, "Who's the author? I can't find this book." And she, busted up laughing at me. And she's like, "No, that's the book we write." And I was like, "Oh, okay, that makes sense," because there really is just a huge gap in resources and how to construct those day-to-day interactions, those conversations that we have every day, and then those higher stakes conversations in such a way that really builds that culture of connection in our schools. And educators just aren't always aware of the importance of paying attention to their own emotions, how they're expressing
Yeah.
care on that daily, consistent basis, how to plan for those conversations,
Mm.
and just all of the different ways that communication plays a role in our school culture. And a lot of what we talk
Hmm.
about really does kind of go against instinct, right? So, for
Mm.
example, we're like super polite, so we always say, "Please, I'd really appreciate it if," and that really can set us up for power struggles if we're asking for something that's not a choice. Um, we provide a perspective on eye contact that really goes against what's typical in white Western culture.
Yeah.
And
Look
so
at
it's just,
me.
yeah, exactly. Look at my face when I'm talking to you. Those kinds of things really, a lot of us were raised that way. A lot of us, have that ingrained in us just in the culture that we came up in. And so it's not instinctive. And so
Mm.
we needed to write it down.
Yeah, there's a lot to learn there. Well, that's really cool. And I love that about your book, when you see an opportunity and a gap, right? And you fill it. So it becomes very
Right.
useful. Uh, just to mention very quick, I have a book coming out too on principal entry plans, and I
Oh,
didn't see a
great.
lot out there. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? In the ones I could find, it was like deep, deep, deep searching. If you put in entry plan,
Right.
principal entry plan, nothing came up. And now
Yeah.
one other book is out, but whatever. So,
Yeah.
anyways, that's really great that you found that opportunity, and I love that you worked, right, Erica and Tiffany together on it. I know, Erica, you really resonate with this idea of isolation as a choice, right? And
Yeah.
so, how's your relationship with Tiffany benefited you?
Yeah, well, I so appreciate your platform because it really is a job where you can become isolated, and so bringing leaders
Mm,
together is so critical. But Tiffany, I can't even count all of the different ways that she's benefited me both personally and professionally. We connected really early on. We went through the administration prep program together down here in
right.
Ashland. And I knew I wanted to collaborate with her right away. She asked such good questions, and like any good ruckus maker, she was not satisfied with the answers oftentimes, especially if it was like, "It's always been that way," or "It's not
Yeah.
possible." Those things that can sometimes close the thing down. And she always has this way to gently push that moves folks outside of the box. So we connected there, and we both ended up becoming administrators in the same district and at the same time. So we really relied on each other
Yeah.
early on, and then throughout we would get together at least once a month and just talk about how we were getting through every day, running scenarios by each other, asking for advice, and just making each other better. So, really, really grateful for having Tiffany in my life. She shaped me as who I am as a leader today. So, it's continued for at least 10 years now. Days keep
Awesome.
ticking by.
Cool. Well, hey, I'm really enjoying our conversation and excited about your book, Connecting Through Conversation, a playbook for talking with students. We're going to pause here for a second, and I'm going to share some messages from our sponsors. But on the other side, Tiffany, I'd like to talk more about relationships, but this time in terms of building strong relationships with kids. Learn how to successfully navigate change, shape your school's success, and empower your teams with Harvard certificate in school management and leadership. You can get online professional development that fits your schedule. Courses include leading change, leading school strategy and innovation, leading people, and leading learning. You could apply today at betterleadersbetterschools.com/Harvard. You know that, or you know what student engagement sounds like. Students ask questions, they build on each other's ideas. The classroom's alive with conversation. Creating that kind of classroom is much easier said than done. TeachFX helps teachers make it happen. Their AI provides teachers with insights into high leverage teaching practices like how much student talk happened and which questions got students talking. TeachFX is like giving each teacher their own on demand instructional coach to help them boost student engagement and learning, as well as their own. It's eye opening for teachers and scales the impact of each coach and principal. Ruckus makers can start a free pilot with your teachers today. Go to teachfx.com/BLBS to launch a free pilot for your school. If your students are struggling to stay focused and your teachers are showing signs of burnout, you need to act right now. The good news is that there's a path forward. It is possible to lay the foundation to learning and re energize teachers, and it's found through executive functioning skills. When students get practice with these skills, they can better self regulate and they are more successful academically as a result. Our friends over at Organized Binder have released a new self paced course that will teach you how to teach executive functioning skills and set your students up for success. The goal of this course is to help your students be more successful and get teachers back to the world and the work they were called to do. Learn more at organizedbinder.com. And last but not least, I have an awesome live event. It's happening July 14th through 16th in Denver, Colorado. And the guiding question of the event is what would be possible on your campus if you were consistently operating at your best? You'll answer that question, and 49 other school leaders will answer that question. Right now, we have 2 tickets available. So go to betterleadersbetterschools.com/Denver 2023, and I'd love to see you there. All right, back to the show with Erika and Tiffany. We're talking about their new book, which I highly recommend picking up. That book is called Connecting Through Conversation, a playbook for talking with students. And before the sponsor break, I mentioned that I'd love to hear from you, Tiffany, on your formula for building stronger relationships with kids.
Yeah, well, for Eric and I, we really believe that at the very heart of education is connection. And so we're talking about connection between educators and students, educators and each other, and educators and families, just connection all around with the humans that are in the school. And so at the foundation of that is really building connected relationships for learning. So as educators, we hear all the time that relationships are necessary for connecting with kids. I mean, any educator will tell you that relationships really matter.
Yeah.
What Eric and I realized that a lot of people talk about why relationships are important, but we don't necessarily hear so much about how to do it. So we spent some time really talking and thinking about what makes a strong and connected relationship for learning. And we believe that there's 3 main components that must be in place. Those are listening, dignity, and trust. And
Mm,
so when we truly listen, kids will speak their truth. And in order for that to happen, we need to listen actively when we're talking with students. We need to seek to understand before we take action or move forward. We need to put away distractions. So we don't want our phone out or checking our
yeah.
email. We don't want to be thinking about what's the next thing I'm going to say. We really want to be present and actively listening so we can truly hear what the student has to say. When we do that, students feel valued and seen and understood. And that in turn helps really acknowledge their identity. So, and when we're acknowledging their identity, then we're treating them with dignity. That's our next piece. And we really want to know our kids. So we want to learn their names, know how to pronounce them correctly, find out about their interests. What kind of music do they like? What are the cultural trends that they're into right now? And we want to appreciate who they are, celebrate who they are, celebrate their differences and their unique characteristics. And all of those things together really help acknowledge and affirm their dignity. When their dignity is affirmed, it helps build and foster, it helps build belonging. It fosters safe, welcoming, and inclusive environments. And those are environments where students trust us. And we know that kids need to trust us to learn from us. Learning is really risky. When we think about the last time we learned something new, like really learned a new concept or skill, there may or may not have been someone watching us. For kids, we ask them to engage in this productive struggle every day. And a lot of the times we ask them to do it publicly. For a
Mm.
whole bunch of kids, that can be just unbelievably terrifying. So they need to trust us so that they can make mistakes, so they can ask questions. And, to be able to set that up, to have this connected relationship for learning, we really have to have all of those components in place, that listening, dignity, and trust. And then, when we have those, we can move mountains. We can do all kinds of things.
Absolutely. And shout out to Carlos, who is just really resonating with that idea of active listening and staying in the moment. So thank you, Carlos, for the comment. Uh, I just want to highlight too, it's such low hanging fruit, but like knowing everybody's name and learning how to pronounce, just do that, right? So my wife's surname, because she's Zimbabwean, is Mutambudzi. It is very phonetic. It's so easy to pronounce, so easy, right? But it's got a lot of letters. And what's so interesting is when we lived in like Scotland, let's say that for example, um, the post carrier, right, would come by and say delivery for Mutambudzi, and they would attempt it and get it right most of the time. And here it's an observation, and it's disappointing to be honest, but so often on the phone or whatever, like people in America will see that name and say, oh, I can't even, like they say, I can't even do that. Like, what are you talking about? It's so phonetic, or we live on Tecumseh Road, you know, that's pretty, I don't know. I think it's kind of easy, or try it. But when I'll tell people on the phone, like, here's where oh, you're going to have to spell that for me. There's no way. Right. And
Yeah.
those kind of comments ooze so much privilege, or, mm, I don't want to say, like, I don't know what the opposite of curiosity is, but like, oh, I don't even want to attempt to learn this thing. So I don't know if I'm opening up a can of worms, but get to know people's names, learn how to say them. Is there anything I'm sharing that you're resonating with that you want to comment on as well, or we can keep moving on?
No, I think absolutely. I think for students, if somebody knows their name
Mm,
and really pronounces, I mean, as a principal, I work really hard to know every single student's name. And it
mhm.
matters. They light up when you say their name and you know how to pronounce it
Yeah.
correctly. And I'll say things like, remind me your name, or can you remind me how to pronounce that? I want to make sure I get it right. And then I'll practice it with them and make sure that I'm getting it right. The other thing that I'll do at school is, if somebody's pronouncing someone's name incorrectly, really gently, I'll help them pronounce it correctly. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's important that we help each other out with that as well.
Yeah.
I also think it's really about knowing our students and our families too, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
knowing the kid's name, knowing a little bit about them, figuring out who's their mom, who's their person they're living with, what's their dog's name, as much as we can integrate into our conversations with them about the fact that we see them, we value them, we appreciate what's unique about them, goes so far in building those relationships that will allow us to really make connections.
Yeah, it's not it's not rocket science. You want to have a great
No.
campus, a great school, value people, do whatever you
Right.
can to
Yes.
communicate that you value them, and great stuff happens. So,
Yeah.
Erica, I want to go back. You mentioned how you appreciate being polite, and
Mhm.
sometimes that you know uh, might invite like a power struggle. So
Right.
I don't know if anybody's listening or watching and thinking about that. Just what advice do you have for ruckus makers in terms of avoiding power struggles?
And Yeah, we've all been there, right? I think you ask a student for something that feels really small or a really quick redirection, and all of a sudden they're responding with this, invitation
Yeah.
to rumble in some kind of way.
Hmm.
And what we know for sure is that as soon as we've engaged in a power struggle with a kid, we have lost. So the best course of action, of course, is to just avoid them in the first place. Something as basic, and we talked about this a little bit, but making sure that we don't frame non-requests as questions can make a big difference.
Right.
So, for example, instead of saying to a student, "Can you please take your seat?" you might say, "You can take your seat now," or "You may take your seat." And that subtle word change can make a really big difference. A technique that I really like is the say it and run technique, which is essentially share the expectation and then get away as fast as you can. So, for example, if a student puts their phone on the desk right after you reminded everyone to put it away, you might kneel next to them and say, "Hey, I'm going to enter attendance. You can either put your phone in your pocket or your backpack and then get out of there and start entering attendance before they respond." Sometimes just by removing yourself, you're allowing them to save some face, right? Like they're not going to get into it with you, and it makes it easier for them to just follow the expectation. Another kind of favorite quick reframing is to let students know we wish we could do whatever it is that they were wanting to do. Like Tiffany saying
Hmm.
before, "Gosh, I wish we could climb trees at school." Um, and so, for example, when I was at the high school, we had a tardy problem, and I was chatting with a student about why they were late, again, and they started to go on and on about how in the world can we expect them to show up at time when school starts so early, and it's unreasonable that school starts so early. And my response was, I really wish we did start later. Like, I would love to get a little more sleep. We know what research says about later start times. Like, I wish that was true. I think you should really consider writing a letter to the school board. Like, let's see what we can do to change this. And until then, you need to be on time. And it just took all of the fight out because there was nothing to convince me of. Like, I'm with you. I really wish we did start later. And that did have a happy ending. We didn't have a power struggle, and we did end up moving the start time later. So it was a win-win-win. But just taking out that need to argue is really helpful. And we have a ton of really specific kind of tips, techniques, sentence stems on our website. Would love for folks to check that out if they want to learn more. Free resources.
What's the website?
www.connectingthroughconversation.com.
Brilliant. We'll have that in the
Yeah.
show notes for folks too. I
Thank
so
you.
resonate with everything you're sharing, and I wish I had this book. When I was still in the classroom, I came across a podcast episode. It was discussing parenting, and I learned so much about how this dad interacted with his kids. I applied the lesson into the classroom, and what I'm sensing is that this book delivers like that podcast episode did, because it gave me an approach. And what I realized is to manage my emotion, manage my energy, stop getting in power struggles with students. And when they would say things that were hurtful or embarrassing, or even, might trigger me and make me angry, right? Like they do that, and sometimes
Mhm.
intentionally. I realized I would get into an escalating relationship, with them. It will only make things worse, and it would end up with them getting written up and sent out of class, right? I never
Right.
gave myself a timeout, by the way. And once I had that epiphany and that aha in the language to essentially kind of, it was almost like a Jedi. A kid would say something, and I would not agree or disagree. I would have a very in the middle response, like maybe,
Mhm.
right? You're the
Mhm.
worst
Mhm.
teacher. You're probably right, maybe, right? And they're like, "What do you mean? I just insulted you in front of all my peers. You're supposed to now fight back and tell me I'm a bad kid and write me up." And I refused to do that. Once I learned that lesson, I didn't write up a single kid ever again. And
Right.
that taught me it was me, right? Because the kids didn't necessarily change. We stopped with the escalation, right?
Right.
But my response to those behaviors changed, and then the behaviors started going away, and then there was no more need. So that's why I highly recommend your work. It's so practical like that, and show you how to teach with kids. Like, wow, what a gift to our profession. So that said, let's move on to the last three questions I ask all my guests. This is for both of you, this one. We'll start with you, Tiffany, but basically, if you could put one message, right, on all marquees on every campus around the world for a single day, what would your message be?
At the heart of education is connection.
Gotcha. Second message, get out of the tree.
Right.
Come.
Or I get that you're angry.
Right. Safely get down from the tree. Yeah.
Erika, what would your message be?
I would say we build connected relationships for learning. Like, I think if we just put that out there as this is what we do here, then we can work together as a community to make it happen.
Erika's been on the show before, so Tiffany, I'm going to give you the dream school question. You're building your dream school. You have no constraints in terms of resources. Your only limitations, your ability to imagine. So how would Tiffany build her dream school? What would be the three guiding principles?
Oh my goodness. Well, Danny, I just built my dream school. We actually just opened, yeah, we opened it. It opened on last Monday, where we invited kids in. And so
Congrats.
it's a family filled place. So we have a family room that is fully equipped with a washer and dryer, a coffee maker, a dishwasher, and a microwave, and a comfy place for families to be able to come in and connect and gather. And then really kid-centered spaces. So we have sensory spaces kind of all around the school. We have a quiet corner in every classroom with different sensory tools for calming and de-escalation. We have a restaurant-style cafe, so there's no industrial tables. Like, it's more of, smaller circle tables or bigger bistro tables or different oval areas, or, spots for kids to connect with one another. And then off to the side, we have what's called a sensory cafe. So it's still part of the cafe. There's all glass windows on the side, but it's a noise reduction. So students that have different sensory or overstimulation issues can still be part of our school. Lots of outdoor learning spaces, so an opportunity to be outside. We have a huge courtyard and a garden. But if there were no limitations and I could totally make it my own school, I would hire a bunch more staff and pay them a bunch more money.
Awesome. And Erika, you could have the last word. We covered a lot of ground today. So of everything we discussed, what's the one thing you want a ruckus maker to remember?
So I think I would encourage all the ruckus makers listening to really focus in on how each interaction that you have with a student or a fellow educator is serving to build a connected relationship for learning. And to know and give yourself grace. Like, it's not always instinctive or easy. It's oftentimes really hard. So prepare, write it down, make a plan. And we got into this because we love kids. So use your conversations to make sure that they feel that every single day.